I'm Shel Fitzpatrick. That's Clark. We're Seashell Realty Group, owners, and I'm designated broker. This is Grit and Grace, and we're here to talk to you a little bit about some important documents in real estate. You've really shown some dedication. You've made it through the IABS, the CPN, wire fraud, code of ethics. For your protection, get a home inspection, home protection plans. We are moving towards the general information and notice to buyers and sellers. And I cannot make this one brief. Now, if you're a nerd like me, you'll enjoy it. I kind of refer to this as the real estate vocabulary sheet. But it's getting us ready for either the buyer's representation agreement or the listing agreement, which will eventually get us to the contract. So with that said, I'm going to start in with the general information and notice to buyers and sellers. There are 34 quote-unquote vocabulary words. And I'm starting on page 1, number 34, annexation. If a property is outside the city limits of a municipality, the buyer should know that the property may later become annexed by a nearby municipality. So to find more information, you can contact the local municipality directly. Number 33, an appraisal, and we kind of touched on this on the for-year protection, get a home inspection. An appraisal is a valuation of the property. The appraiser renders an estimate of value as of a certain date under assumptions and conditions stated in the appraisal report. And typically a buyer's lender requires an appraisal to verify that the loan is secured by property that is worth a certain amount. The appraisal is not the same as an inspection. Number 32, brokers. A real estate broker represents a party, buyer or seller, in a real estate transaction. A party may work with the broker or with one of the broker's agents, and both a buyer and a seller will be provided with the form entitled Information About Brokerage Services, which you've already watched the video on, and that defines agency relationships. An agent may help a seller market the property or help a buyer locate a property. The agent is obligated to negotiate the transaction and may assist in gathering information and may coordinate many details in the transaction. Brokers and agents are not inspectors. They do not possess the expertise to conduct inspections and therefore do not make any representations, warranties, or guarantees about the property's condition. Agents are not attorneys. Parties are encouraged to seek the assistance of an attorney to help in understanding any of the legal consequences and provisions in the contract or transaction. Number 31, and again we touched on this one as well when we talked about inspections in the For Your Protection Get a Home Inspection video. And this is kind of broad. It's going to cover residential, lots, land, farm and ranch, commercial. So you may not necessarily need every single one of these. It's up to you, your personal preference, and the property you're looking at. But there are general, which are environmental conditions that buyers should know may exist, and those may include, but are not limited to, asbestos, lead-based paint, mold, pesticides, radon gas, toxic waste, underground storage tanks, formaldehyde insulation, and other pollutants. Wetlands or endangered species on the property may restrict the use of the property. There are environmental inspections if the buyer is concerned. The buyer should hire a qualified expert to inspect the property for such items. And of course, we've got a form for that. If the property was built before 1978, federal law requires that the seller provide the buyer with a pamphlet titled Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home, and that would be lead-based paint type items. There's mold, and it's not uncommon to find mold spores in a property. The concern about mold increases when there are large amounts of mold found on the property. And we have a form for that. Oak wilt and diseased trees. There are diseases such as oak wilt and other conditions that affect trees and other plants. If the buyer is concerned about that, the buyer should have the trees and other plants inspected by a professional. There's also noise. Some of these causes for noise could be airports, railways, highways, restaurants, bars, schools, arenas, construction. So if the buyer is encouraged to drive and review the area around the property at various times of day. Number 30, expansive soils. Soil conditions vary greatly throughout Texas, and many soils move, some more than others. This movement will many times affect the foundation of homes and buildings and may cause cracks to appear in walls and other parts of the building. Additionally, if a property is newly constructed, the concrete curing process may also cause the foundation of a building to move. Seasonal changes in moisture in the soil may also cause foundations to move. And of course, if you're concerned, have a professional do an inspection. Number 29, FIRPTA, the Foreign Investment in Real Property Tax Act of 1980, or FIRPTA. It may require buyers in certain transactions involving a seller who qualifies as a foreign person to withhold up to 15% of the amount realized by the seller. Now don't panic. The title company is usually going to handle this for you. Just something we want you to be aware of. Number 28, flood hazard, floodways, and flood insurance. Many properties are in flood hazard areas. Lenders who make loans on properties located in special flood hazard areas typically require the owner to maintain flood insurance. And the buyer is always encouraged to buy flood insurance regardless of whether the property is high, moderate, or low risk. There is a FEMA flood map for that. Number 27, historic or conservative districts. Properties located in historic or conservative districts may have restrictions on the use or the architecture of the property, and if the buyer is concerned whether the property is located in such a district, contact the local government for specific information. Number 26, inspections, repairs, walkthroughs. We talked on this a little bit on For Your Protection, Get a Home Inspection. Inspections. The buyer is encouraged to have the property inspected by licensed inspectors. The buyer should have the inspections completed during any option period. The buyer should accompany the inspectors during the inspection and ask the inspectors any questions they may have. Brokers and agents do not possess any special skills, knowledge, or expertise concerning inspections or repairs. If the buyer requests names of inspectors or repair professionals from the agent, the buyer should know that the agent is not making any representations or warranty as to the ability or workmanship of the inspector or repair professionals. As for repairs, the buyer and the seller should resolve in writing any obligation and any timing of the obligation to complete repairs the buyer may request before the option period expires. And then there's the walkthrough. Before close of sale, the buyer should walk through the property and verify that any repairs are complete. If the condition of the property does not satisfy the contractual provisions, the buyer should notify the buyer's agent before closing. Number 25, mandatory owners association. An owners association may require a property owner to be a member. The buyer may obtain subdivision information, the restrictions applying to the subdivision, the bylaws, the rules, the owners association, and resale certificate. If a membership in an owners association is required, the buyer will probably be obligated to pay periodic dues and assessments. Failure to pay such dues could result in a lien and foreclosure on the property. Counting down to 24, mineral interests. Determining who owns the mineral interest under a property, for example, rights to oil and gas, normally requires an expert, such as a landman, to review the chain of title to the property. Many times the mineral interest may have been severed from the property and may be owned by persons other than the seller. Moving along to number 23, Multiple Listing Service, MLS. This is a database and a cooperative tool between brokers. Agents who use the MLS must comply with MLS rules, and the listing agent is required to timely report the current status of a listing, including when the property sold, leased, no longer available. And the information in the MLS, such as square footage, assessed value, taxes, school boundaries, the year built, is obtained from different sources, such as county appraisal district, appraiser, builder. So the broker or the agent who provides the information from the MLS does not verify the accuracy of the information. The buyer should independently verify the information in the MLS and not rely on that information. Number 22, permits. Permits may be required to construct, alter, or repair or improve property. In Comal, you will most commonly see septic permits required. Number 21, possession. Most contracts provide that the seller will deliver possession of the property to the buyer at the time the sale closes and funds, there's the keyword funds, or according to a temporary residential lease. There may be a short delay between closing and actual funding, so the buyer should also take this potential delay into account when planning the move. Number 20, property insurance. And we've got a form for that. But promptly after entering into a contract to buy a property and before any option period expires, the buyer should contact an insurance agent to determine the availability and affordability of insurance for that property. And there are numerous variables that an insurance company will evaluate when offering insurance at certain coverage levels and at certain prices. Most lenders require that the property be insured in an amount not less than the loan amount, and failure to obtain property insurance before closing may delay the transaction or cause it to end. And we have a form for that. Number 19, property values. Brokers and agents cannot guarantee desired future market conditions or property values. The ultimate decision on the price and terms a buyer is willing to buy and a seller is willing to sell for a specific property rests solely with that buyer and seller. Number 18, residential service contracts. We've touched on this a little bit as well in the home protection plan video, but a residential service contract is a product under which a residential service company, for an annual fee, agrees to repair or replace certain equipment or items on a property. Number 17, restrictions on property near international border. I have to say we've not really seen this in Comal, but we will cover that. We just need to be aware that in certain counties located near an international border, Texas law may prohibit the sale of property lacking required water and sewer services. Number 16, school boundaries. School boundaries may change and are at times difficult to determine. The school boundaries that an agent may provide or that they're provided through the MLS are only mapped estimates from other sources. So if this is an important issue for you, you should check into it further and confirm. Number 15, septic tanks and on-site sewer facilities. Comal County has a website for this, and it is very common to see this in Canyon Lake. Many properties have septic tanks or other on-site sewer facilities. Please refer to the document entitled Information about On-Site Sewer Facilities for more information. Number 14, sex offenders and criminal activity. Neither a seller or a seller's agent of a residential property has a duty to disclose any information about registered sex offenders. If the buyer is concerned about sex offenders who may reside in the area, access the DPS website, and there's a sex offender registry, or you can contact the local police department to obtain information about criminal activity in the area. Number 13, square footage. If the purchase price is based on size of the property, the structure, the buyer should have the information the buyer receives about the square footage independently verified. Square footage information comes from lots of other sources like appraisal districts, appraisers, builders, and such information is only an estimate. Actual square footage may vary. I know that sounds crazy, but you could have 3 different appraisers go out and measure, and all of them are going to come up close, but not exactly the same. Number 12, statutory tax districts. The property may be located in a utility or other statutorily created district providing water, sewer, drainage, or flood control facilities and other services. For example, municipal utility district or MUD, water improvement district, or public improvement district. The buyer is likely to receive prescribed notice when buying property in such a district. Number 11, surveillance. Be aware that when viewing a property, a seller might record or otherwise electronically monitor a buyer without the buyer's knowledge or consent. And the buyer might photograph or otherwise record the property without the seller's knowledge or consent. The party should consult an attorney before recording or photographing another person or property. Number 10, survey. A survey identifies the location of boundaries, major improvements, fence lines, drive encroachments, easements, and other items on the property. The buyer should obtain a survey early enough in the transaction to help the buyer identify any encroachments, encumbrances to title, or restrictions. When a seller provides a survey, it will be accompanied by a T47. Number 9, synthetic stucco. Synthetic stucco, sometimes referred to as EIFS, is an exterior siding product that's been placed on some properties in the recent past. And if that product was not properly installed, it has been known to cause damage to the structure, such as wood rot and moisture. If the property has synthetic stucco, the buyer should ask an inspector to carefully inspect the siding and answer any questions. Number 8, tax prorations. Typically, a buyer and a seller agree to prorate a property's taxes through the closing date. Property taxes are due and payable at the end of each calendar year, and the escrow agent will estimate at closing the taxes of the current year. If the sellers qualified for tax exemptions, for example, a homestead or over 65 exemption, such exemptions may or may not apply after closing. After closing, the taxes may increase because the exemptions may no longer apply. So when you're buying a new construction, the taxes at closing may be prorated based on the land value only and will later increase when the appraisal district includes the value of the new improvement. The actual taxes due, therefore, at the end of the year and the subsequent years may be very different from the estimates used at closing. And when you do purchase a property, please do go to the county and apply for any exemptions you may be eligible for, such as homestead or over 65. Number 7, termination option. Most contract forms contain an option clause which provides the buyer with an unrestricted right to terminate the contract. Most buyers choose to buy this termination option. The buyer will be required to pay for the termination option in advance, and the option fee is negotiable. Most buyers will conduct many of their reviews, inspections, and other due diligence during the option period. The buyer must strictly comply with the time period under the option. If the buyer wants to extend the option period, the buyer must negotiate an extension separately and obtain the extension in writing and pay the additional fee for the extension. The buyer should not rely on oral extensions. We are getting so close. Number 6, Tidewaters, does not apply to Canyon Lake, but number 5, title insurance or abstract of title does. The buyer should obtain a title insurance policy or have an abstract of title covering the property examined by an attorney. If the buyer obtains title insurance policy, the buyer should have the commitment of title insurance reviewed by an attorney no later than the time required under the contract. Your title company is your title insurance company. Number 4, utilities. The buyer should evaluate what utilities the buyer will require and check to be sure that utilities available in the area suit the buyer's needs. Number 3, water level fluctuations, and this does pertain to Canyon Lake. State law requires that the seller notify a buyer of a property that adjoins a lake, reservoir, or other impoundment of water with a storage capacity of at least 5,000 acre-feet at its normal operating level. Just be aware that lake levels do fluctuate, so if you're buying a property for the view, be aware that if it's water being used downstream, drought, or flood, lake levels fluctuate. Number 2, water wells. If the property has a water well, the buyer should or the lender may require that the equipment be inspected and the water tested. And number 1, we have covered this one in the wire fraud warning video. Wire fraud. Criminals are targeting real estate transactions. Please refrain from transmitting personal information such as bank account numbers or other financial information via unsecured email or other electronic communication. That's it. You made it. Congratulations. This has us ready for the buyer's representation agreement or the listing agreement, which will in turn get us to the contract.